get into the debate and discussions, we can start to speed up the process. My name's Alison Scurfield. I do know the majority of people on the call today, but there's a couple of the participants that I've never met before. I'm the Chief Exec of the National Industry Body, TSA, but also the standards body for the sector. We've got a really good lineup this morning and this afternoon, and the main focus for today is looking at the myth busting of going digital. We all know the wonderful things that we can achieve for delivering personalised care, but we need to think about how can we do it now, and how can we do it safely, and how can we deliver quality services. Here's the programme, and you'll see that there's a session from myself to look at policy drivers, and then we're going to conclude the session later by Jeremy Porteous, the Chief Exec of the Housing LIN. The webinar aims to support housing and care providers navigate the digital landscape by getting into the detail of how digital switchover will affect the group living, individual homes, and the impact on all of those 1.9 million service users and residents out there. We're going to have some short, as we've just looked at the agenda, we're going to have some short presentations, followed by lots of time for discussion and answers. This is about you getting reassurance on the call and getting some clarity to some of the problems that you're facing out there in your service delivery. Each speaker will speak for about 5 minutes, and then the event will be followed by the webinars took place on the 22nd of June. Everon had a breakfast meeting, and they're gathering lots of insight at the moment. And there will be a white paper published at the December, early January. So it's an exciting time to work with Everon as a stakeholder in the marketplace. But hopefully we'll start to learn lots of insights from the call today. So I'm just going to set the scene nationally with some strategic drivers, some national drivers. But what we in this for? Why are we trying to achieve analog to digital and move into a digital future? So next slide, please. Many of us have looked at unlocking personalised outcomes, the right care in the right place at the right time. Many of you on the call would have seen all of these strategy drivers, but where did it start? In 2017, TSA published the white paper about analog to digital and that imminent date of 2025. And there's so much work going on in the background to make sure that every commissioner, every service provider and other suppliers on this call today are given reassurance that we can have a safe transition and, most importantly, protect the vulnerable people in our society. These reports are policy drivers, but they're through to practical delivery drivers such as the ADAS Commission. Next slide, please. What we're trying to do is create personalisation, proactive preventative care. We need to move to a digital state so that we can start sharing data about an individual to make sure that that data gets in the hands of the right people to really deliver good quality outcomes for people in our communities. And you'll see in those purple enablers at the bottom of the screen, interoperability and making sure digital works is one of the key drivers of achieving quality outcomes. Next slide, please. You're going to hear from Jeremy later today, but there's been a big programme about housing, TAPI principles. Many on the call have heard of HAPPY principles, which were construction principles embedded into lots of housing providers. The TAPI principle is a national piece of work looking at the technology principles for delivering good housing services that are co-produced, cost-effective, but you see that word again, interoperable, using data in an outcome-focused way, but in a preventative, personal-centred, and most importantly, quality-focused. Next one, please. Jeremy will talk through the work at the end of the session, but key to this is co-producing. Everon have done amazing over the last few months of co-producing and engaging with the sector to make sure what they're doing is not only providing you with support and equipment, but also being there and risk sharing with you, looking at co-production and delivering good outcomes through enabling their technology. The key elements of delivering some great work and personalised services around vision, leadership and workforce or people. Everon want to work with you out there in your organisations and work with your leadership and work with what are the key things to make sure that you're delivering safe quality services. Standards is really important, and I'm sure we'll get to some of the standardisation on the call today. But most importantly, the big piece of work that we're doing is about evidence and then benefit realisation. So that's just giving you some context for today. There's national drivers where we want to go to deliver better outcomes for people. But I really want to start now with the programme, the people behind what is happening in this transition. And the first speaker today is John Livermore, All IP at the Industry Engagement at Openreach. Over to you, John, to give some insights from your perspective about the analogue to digital shift and the opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Alison. I need to check, actually, is it a next slide thing, or do I can do it myself?
It will be next slide. Lee will...
Sorry, John, I'm controlling it. So if you just tell me when you want me to move on.
Okay, I'm Professor Chris Whitty. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. I've only got 10 minutes. So I'm going to be fairly brief through this, and thank you for Alison and also the folks from Everon. This is just a quick run through really of what most of you have seen before, just to make sure that everyone understands what the reach is of this particular programme. The first slide is really just explain that Openreach are not BT. BT Group is an umbrella company, and out of BT Group, it owns Openreach, but it also owns BT Consumer, who are a big player as a communications provider. They also own BT Enterprise, and BT Enterprise splits into a wholesale business and a retail business. But it's just really to make the point that Openreach are an independent engineering company. Effectively, we look after the premises back to the telephone exchange. We don't own the telephone exchanges. We don't own anything inside the premises. We finished at the master socket. Next slide, please. A quick run through this again, because a lot of you have heard this before. Why is it happening? What's happening? What do we mean about this? A lot of people are saying, oh, it's the end of copper. It isn't any of that stuff. It is basically a move from equipment that was installed in telephone exchanges back in the 1980s. So back in the 1980s, British Telecom, as it was then, actually installed digital exchanges from old mechanical ones. The equipment was put in the 1980s around the country, known as System X or System Y. That has now had its day. And it is creaking, to say the least. So back in 2018, BT Group, who owned that equipment, went to Ofcom and also to the government department that you'll know as the DCMS, and basically said to them, we would like to run a 7-year program to close that equipment down. And that's what we're going to do, close that equipment down at the end of 2025. That was what they asked to do, and that's what was signed off. We are now over 4 years into that programme, and the truth of it is that the can has been kicked down the road by several different entities. We have carried on producing the replacement product. The replacement product is fibre. So glass fibre in the ground is the replacement product, either a full fibre end-to-end line or a part fibre, but part of it remains copper and part of it remains fibre. The thing to call out from this, though, is that Openreach's job in this is to produce the network. It isn't to do the migration. So the migration itself is done by every one of these 690 different communications providers: Sky, TalkTalk, BT, Vodafone. The list goes on and on and on. The people that take our money, our money at home, our money, our clients' money in our premises, in our businesses, those telephone companies known as communications providers, ISP, they are the ones that will decide when their customers move over and at what time. That's not Openreach saying, well, nothing to do with us, Gov. It's just a fact. The network is there. We would like them all to do this as quickly as possible because time is running out. We have no influence in terms of the dates or the times. The one thing it won't be is all one area in one go or one street in one go, because every single company will do their own thing at their own speed. Next slide, please. I'm just going to whiz through this. We often talk about the negatives of this. Of course, there are huge positives to the Internet of Things. If you've got glass fibre, you've got faster speeds, you've got bigger bandwidths, you've got biometrics, you've got things of examining people in the home, all that good stuff comes along. But yes, there are challenges with it as well. Next slide, please. This is just a quick diagram to explain what I said earlier. So just look at the green box on the left-hand side. The green box on the left-hand side is this 1980s equipment that's going to be switched off at the end of 2025. Follow the green line down, you'll see that represents an all copper line. So that is copper end to end, piece of metal end to end that runs through. That's been our legacy system. But as you can see, by 2025, that green box on the left has to be switched off. And therefore, over the next just over 3 years, every one of those different communications providers, I mentioned some 690, have to contact their customers and they have to get them to move off of that green box and effectively over to this purple box, which is now the fibre head end, it's known. So if you're moved over to fibre, which we all must be by 2025, there are two flavours. Flavour one is the bottom one, fibre to the premises, where you have a complete change of line. The whole line is now glass fibre end to end. And inside your premises, you will need an engineering visit to convert your master socket into something known as an ONT, which I can just about show there. So a white box is put in instead of the master socket. That needs power, by the way, for those that didn't know. So that needs a 3-pin plug at the end of it. The majority of those over the country are going to be moved over to something that's sitting there today, and that is fibre to the cabinet, also known in the industry as SOGEA. Fibre to the cabinet effectively is what it says. It is the copper remaining in situ between the customer's premises and the street cabinet, and the fibre is added in then between the exchange and the cabinet. And the majority of us will be on that because although Openreach are piling huge amounts of money and resources into getting a full fibre network, the truth of it is that we've got to move on now with this migration. And the next 3 years, we've got to move over to what's already there. In most cases, that is going to be fibre to the cabinet. Next slide, please. This just shows a quick representation inside the premises. So the upshot of all of this blurb is that on the day that your communications provider or your client's communications provider or your lift provider or your chip and pin machine or your emergency phone or whatever it is that's sitting on the telephone socket, every single device that is today sitting on a telephone socket, on the day that it's been migrated by your communications provider, all of the sockets in that premises will cease to work. Extension sockets will no longer work. The only thing that's going to work is the master socket, and they will only work for broadband. So everything becomes router centric. It doesn't matter if the guard at Buckingham Palace who's got a phone behind him, he's going to need to have a router. It doesn't matter if that is a phone by the beach up at Cromer, I know there's up there, and it's got an issue because actually you pick it up, you make a call to the emergency, someone's drowning. That's going to need a router. Everything will need a router, therefore you need to have power to power the router. And if it's the ONT I talked about, you need power for that. Therefore, no power means no service, and you're into the world of battery backups and all sorts of things. In the past, resilience has come from the telephone exchange because that copper line had power going down it to make it work. On the day that you are migrated, you lose access to that green box I mentioned. Therefore, the power must be done locally. Next slide, please. In the telecare world, there's lots of talk about ATA ports and so on. A very quick run through of ATA ports. There has been a general kind of thought in the industry for a while. This is all a bit of a storm in a teacup. You'll probably get a new router. The router will have a port in the back that's analog, something like the pictures you can see there, and you'll plug your existing equipment in. It will all just work. There's a real word to the wise here. Number one, not all communication providers will provide necessarily that socket. Number two, if you have it, it's got to be switched on as part of your calls package. And number three, you need to speak to your provider to say, have you tested the equipment I've currently got through an ATA port in the back of a router? Does it work? How often does it work? What is the risk factor on that? I also run the lab down in Judd Street in the head office near King's Cross. I would say generally the testing that we've seen come in has been variable in terms of its reliability. Nothing's 100%, but some things aren't even 50%, and you need to speak to your providers to do that. Next slide, please. In summary, my call out to people is always, particularly local authorities, but just think of everything in 3 boxes. Number one, main switchboard and comms. Number two, adult social services, telecare, because that is absolutely the most important thing in lots of ways, and that's your industry. And number three, I'll quote what someone said to me down in Salisbury the other day. You don't know what you don't know. Go and do an audit of everything you've got anywhere in your state. Ask the question, what do I use it for? What does it plug in today? How's it going to plug into a router? Next slide, please. Yeah, I'm going to whiz through these. So we can leave those slides, I think. These are the summary. The slides are available. My message really is 2025 is the switch off date, but you could be contacted, your client be contacted tomorrow. You can be given a date for this migration. Everything's through a router. That means it's going to be plugged in. No power, no router, no service. ATA ports, We don't recommend them for life-saving equipment as Openreach, but we don't provide routers. Our view is not a good alternative. Appreciate you might need to do it over a hump, but digital services are better. Thank you for your time. I shall now hand back to Alison.
Thank you, John, and thanks for getting us back on time. Just to remind everybody, in the chat function, there is a poll that Everon are gathering some insights about your readiness to digital. If you could have a look at that while we're going through today, that all of that insight will be gathered into the insights for the white paper that will be published. Now we're going to move on to Phil Kane of Talk, then we're going to have a bit of a chance to ask questions. And there's lots coming in the chat, so over to you, Phil.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for inviting me on. I haven't got any slides, primarily because when we do these events, the CPs and Openreach generally say the same thing, and so you would only be looking at exactly what John's told you. So I'm just going to have a little, a quick 3 or 4 minute chat to try and get you ahead of schedule. So I've been with Talk for about 18 months, and I'm the industry vendor liaison. And one of my main roles is to look after potentially vulnerable customers who may be adversely affected from the switch over to digital. I joined Talk as I say, about 18 months ago. Prior to that, I was with BT, where I did a similar role for the last few years of my career. And I've spent over 40 years working in the telecoms business. In fact, John and I worked together many years ago. So John's given you a very brief overview of how things work technically. And for Talk, we're one of over 600 communications providers, and every one is at a different stage, really, as John said. So in Talk's situation, our product Digital Voice is now available, but it's not being promoted as such. However, if you wanted it, you were aware of it, you can phone up and you can ask for it. So it is out there, it is beginning to roll out, but in reasonably low numbers compared to maybe some of the other CPs. I think the important thing to say here is that at this stage, we're not migrating anybody who is either a vulnerable customer or potentially a vulnerable customer. So if somebody phones up and says, "I'd like Digital Voice," we will ascertain the circumstances of that customer. If they are what we consider to be vulnerable, we won't move them over at this stage. And the reason for doing that is that we just want to make absolutely sure that as a company we're ready, but more importantly, the customers who want to migrate are ready. The last thing we want is somebody pushing that button or tripping on a fall mat, whatever it is, and no signal going through. So it's a cautious approach from Talk at the moment. But as John said, we're now nearly into 2023, and last few years we started talking about this 5 years ago. And I'm thinking it's a long time away, and of course it's now getting very, very close. So one thing I do want to mention is about our test lab in Earlham, and John mentioned the Openreach lab in London. I manage our lab up here in the north. We've had several manufacturers and signal suppliers come into us. Most of the big ones have been in, your likes of your Tunstall's and your Dorrows, and they've tested both analog equipment and digital equipment to make sure that there's no issues come migration. In general, these things work. However, there are often some things that don't, and a little tweak needs to be made to equipment. So I really encourage manufacturers and suppliers to come in and test their equipment, both directly connected to the network and also connected to the ATA, which is the analog telephone adapter on the back of the router that Talk send out. So whilst some manufacturers have been into SEERs, many haven't. I'll be really honest, the numbers are reasonably low. Some of them have been into the BT lab, some of them have been into the Openreach lab, but my feeling on this really is that although it's the potentially the same network they're going to be connected to, i.e. it's an Openreach provided fibre network. These networks all work in slightly different ways. They're configured differently, and so our recommendation is, come along to our lab and test your equipment. So really, my ask to people on the call today is, if you're talking to your supplier, ask them have they tested their equipment at any of the CP's labs. If they haven't, encourage them to do so, especially coming to the Talk one. And I have asked the chair to circulate my contact details at the end of today's call. If anybody wants to pass them on to suppliers, we're more than happy to work with them and welcome along to the lab. And that's probably it from me now. So I know we've got some questions coming in, and hopefully that'll give a brief update as to where Talk are. So I'll hand back to chair, and if there's any questions, John and if there's any difficult ones, John will answer them.
Thank you, Phil. And there is lots of questions, as you can imagine. I think the first one that's come in is for John. John, Openreach ensure the engineers. Well, how can we get you to really reassure us that Openreach will protect the lives of vulnerable people? It's about those people in those properties and using it during this digital migration. How can you reassure the people on the call that that's happening? Is John on the call?
Sort of disappear.
Okay, Phil, there's a couple of questions for you as we're waiting for John. You talk about testing, and Phil, we have Tim Mulry who will come in at the end to give an update of the work that we've been doing with the Department of Health and the testing with the transformation team. But it's really important that testing is done. But there's a question here about testing in the BT lab. And then why do the need to test again on Talk? Could you give it just a little bit overview why that's really important? Yeah,
I mean, it's reasonably simple. First of all, in the Openreach lab, there are several CPs in there, and most of the big ones are in there. I'm talking to Johnny, but I know, for example, that BT are in there, Sky are in there, I think Virgin are in there, Talk certainly in there. So I can understand somebody go in there and being able to test on several networks in one day, if you like, or over a couple of days. That obviously makes sense. The advantage of coming to, and I'll talk just for Talk here, the advantage of coming to our lab is that in addition to doing the normal test on the PSTN, the analog, the IP, we've got working battery backup systems in there. We've got a working voice re-injection system in there, but crucially, we have one of our technicians there as well. And I'm not a technician, by the way. So if there are any questions, or can we do this? Can we tweak this? Can we test this? There's somebody on site there who's a very, very experienced engineer, been working on this stuff for years. So it's a bit more of a personal service, but more importantly, I think, if there are any technical issues, rather than, oh, I'll phone Talk and find out, you can often solve those little issues on the day with the engineer. So that's why I encourage people to come up north, but also very hospitable up north as well. So.
No, definitely. From Newcastle, so we know what the Northers are like. So fantastic, Phil. Is John on the call now?
He's there, but I think you're on mute, John.
Okay, there is lots of questions, Phil's coming through, and maybe if Tim Mulry's on the call, he could talk about the national testing programme with transformation team if we can't get John back onto the call and the answers, the question answer session. There'll be time at the end for you to ask questions of John. So what awareness of the telecare sector to do Talk staff know? So how do you engage with your staff and make sure of the relevance of this vulnerable, service providers out there and the telecare services?
Yeah, so our product has only recently launched compared to some others, so we are still a little bit on the learning curve. However, all our advisors are very well trained. They work to script, quite honestly, and they have a series of questions that they will used to try and identify a telecare user or a vulnerable customer. At this point, we're not, as I think I said earlier, we're not migrating anybody who's potentially a vulnerable customer. We're not ready for that yet. So we'll use these series of questions when an advisor's talking to a customer to find out if they potentially have a piece of equipment there, be it a telecare or an alarm or something or other. If it's apparent that they do, we won't move forward on that migration. We'll put them on the back burner, and we're just doing that, as I said earlier, really just to make sure we're ready with everything, so that when they do move over, it's a really smooth transition. So I would say that the advisors that we use are well geared up for working with such customers.
Okay, and do you have a date for the migration, Phil?
Well, we are migrating now, so it is going on if somebody asks for it, but we don't have a date whereby we will start migrating vulnerable customers now.
Okay, well that's one for us to be mindful of. There's a big question. I'm sorry that we haven't got John, because there's more questions coming in for John, but there's a really key one here. Can battery backup units be provided free of charge to all vulnerable telecare users that will use TalkTalk as the digital line?
Simple answer is yes. We will provide. In fact, we will provide 2 battery backups if somebody's on a full fibre connection, because the ONT will need to have power as well. So in TalkTalk's case, yes, we will provide vulnerable customers with a battery backup. If it's a full fibre, we provide them with 2.
Okay, brilliant. I'll pick up with John's questions at the end, but we have 4 minutes. Can I bring Tim Mulray in, and could you update our people on the call today about the Lord Kamal roundtable and the subsequent testing information that will be out by early next week? Tim, are you on the call?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me okay, Alison?
Yeah, we've got 4 minutes.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So we had a round table with the Minister for Innovation back in early September, and there were a number of calls to action, but I guess the key one for service providers and manufacturers was around promoting the testing of primarily analog, existing legacy analog on digital networks. So the things that have been talked about today with the test sensors, but also getting that real world feedback as well, because I'm conscious that yes, we the TSA spent a few days in Openreach test centre over the summer, and we will be releasing the results of that very shortly. But also I'm conscious that in the Openreach test centre, it's a very kind of perfect environment, and that's not necessarily the experience that people have out in the in the real world. So there's going to be shortly, I think middle of next week, there'll be a letter going out to all service providers, all manufacturers, asking them to complete and share test results from all of the test centres from BT, KCOM, Openreach, Virgin, etc. TalkTalk, and really what we're looking to do is have a repository of that information, publish it on the website so that people can access it easily. That's not to say that we recommend the use of analog over digital. However, if that's your kind of worst case scenario, if you like, that you're moving through the digital transition and there's going to be some overlap, then these are the things you need to watch out for, which is actually some of these networks don't work well with analog over digital, for example. So hopefully that's given people a bit of an update, Alison.
Brilliant, thank you. Now on to Nick Earle from the CEO of Easy. This is brilliant. We're going to look at the opportunities for data to transform care experience, and that's why we're all here. So over to you, Nick. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Just a couple of comments before I get going. First of all, actually we're pronounced Eseye, not Easy, although that is a pretty good way of describing us, I suppose. I'll take that. We are the solutions provider that powers the Everon solution, which Pete Curley from Everon will be speaking to immediately after me. The other thing I'll say is something Alison said in her opening, which I thought was very relevant, and it's about creating personalisation and proactive and preemptive care. So although I run a technology company, I'm actually going to talk about the opportunity to change business models. And in the context of this, these business models can be changed independent of the digital switchover. So just so you know, obviously it's a very important subject, the transition to the digital switchover, fibre. But actually these solutions have been in the market for many years and work on existing technology. They just work better on the digital technology. That's an important point. You don't have to wait for the digital switchover to take advantage of the business model change. So to go through that, and back to Alison's opening comment, you see, I've got one slide. You see on the left-hand side, when you think about, I use an example of healthcare in the community, a pendant around someone's neck if they fall over or whatever, they press it for emergency help. That's a very obviously reactive system. It's also a pretty unreliable system because it kind of assumes that people will A, wear the pendant, or B, they've got a pendant, and C, they are in a position to press the button and hopefully speak or whatever if they do fall over. And in many cases, as many of you will know, those things don't happen, so it actually doesn't work. The point about the business model change is shown on the picture on the right. It's a totally different model. Essentially, every single thing in the world that has power or can have power will have an IP address and will be able to transmit data. And what that means is every single thing in an assisted living home or a care home or whatever potentially can send data, and it can send data about when it's being used and how it's being used. And what that does is it enables providers such as the Everon, who use us as an IoT company to do this, to actually provide build up a personalized behavior model of a resident in one of these homes. So you get cameras. Have they walked into a certain room? Have they walked out of a room? Has the door opened? Has the door closed? Are they in bed because you have pressure sensors? Are they not in bed? Did they go to the toilet? Did they come back? Has the kettle been switched on? Has the kettle not been switched on? And you could put thousands of icons on this slide. I mean, literally millions in the future. And the point about it is not that you're measuring whether the kettle's been switched on or not, but you're building up a profile of at what time of day does, let's say, my mum in a care home or assisted living or whatever, what time does she normally switch the kettle on? So what you're looking for is anomaly detection behavior, which is patterns as to something that's out of the norm, which then raises an alert, and then you can be proactive about reaching out to say, is everything okay? Either to the patient, or the resident, or to one of the providers that you see on the right-hand side. So I'm essentially describing what the Everon solution does, but in the cloud, they're using artificial intelligence, machine learning to build up a personalized model of behavior with people's interactions with physical things. And by the way, this is exactly how, if you have a Nest thermostat in your home, it's exactly how Nest works, by the way, it's not new. And on the right-hand side, you then have people who say, well, that data could be really useful for me because it's much more efficient. I would like my people who are going to visit the house or whatever to be proactively notified. I'd like the ability to preemptively take action based on some alarming data that I'm seeing. I would actually like to sell my housing service for more money because I am providing these capabilities to the residents, and that will assure them. And actually, of course, but because everything is available over a cloud, you could actually have the relatives of either the people in the care home or assisted living or whatever. And many people do this already. They have an app which they can set rules on. And they can say, if my mum, say in my case, if my mum has one of these alerts, I'll put that as a category A alert, and I want an immediate text or phone call. But these sort of events, it's probably just normally forgetting to do something. I'll classify them as category B alerts. And these events, I don't wish to be notified anyway. So I just don't wish to be notified. A bit like sort of your alarm if you have an ADT system in your house. It's just similar sort of things. So the point about this is that this is all configurable. It's all based on technology that's been around for years. IoT is at least 10 years old. It uses cellular, which is why it's not dependent on the digital switchover. It's enhanced. The Ethernet connection and the speed is enhanced through the digital switchover, but you can do it today. And I'm sure Pete will talk about that better than I can. I think the final point I would make before I then hand back is this is not really about technology. The IoT is going to happen. It'll happen in your own personal life. It'll happen in business. It will happen in the sector that you are all in. The real question is, what can you do to improve efficiency, become reactive, proactive, preemptive in your business models, and take cost and time out of it and deliver a better service? And that's really at the heart of what it is that you're trying to do. And so there are tremendous possibilities here. And certainly from our point of view, being one of the biggest IoT, we're a global company based out of the UK. Everon is one of the, if not the leading company in this space. And as I hand back, I would say that Pete and I did a podcast on this. So there is a 40-minute podcast under the search term IoT leaders, all one word, IoT leaders, and there is a podcast of Pete and I talking about this and how it works in practice, and that could be pretty good if you want to find out more. So with that, I'll leave it there and I'll hand back.
Thank you so much, Nick, and we have some questions coming in, but I'm going to keep that till the end and we'll start to get up into an open debate. So thank you very much. And I want to welcome Pete Curley, the MD of Everon, and, you know, looking at the future-proofing of your digital strategies, but also moving from reactive to proactive care. So over to you, Pete.
Alison, thank you very much. Just before I sort of start running through my slides, can I just thank everybody for attending? Hopefully this is useful to you. And thank you, Alison, for chairing, and all the speakers that have taken the time to attend. I think Alison touched upon it earlier, that we are running a series of webinars and breakfast meetings, and we shall be using the topic, the data, and disseminating that and producing a white paper in December. We're leaving it till December purely because we're hoping for some announcements refunding, and we will obviously make that key to the white paper to inform you guys that where there is or not any potential funding. So what I wanted to do is really sort of continue from Nick's presentation in saying that, you know, the technology that we use in the GSM technology has been out since 2007. The Nordics especially are fully digital, and our system has been deployed across Finland, Sweden, and Germany, as well as the UK now. And you know, there's a hell of a task ahead for us all. I've grabbed a headline from the white paper, and Jeremy, who I think is finishing up today, said that we must ensure that there's an ease of transition from analog to digital, which doesn't disrupt the lives of the people who need it most, and that's got to be absolutely paramount. We've got 26 months to complete this upgrade, and there's in excess of 1.7 million users across the UK, and it's a hell of a task. So in terms of the analog to digital in Scandinavia, the big issues that were solved by moving forward in the GSM world was it cured the issues with installations being more complicated, and I'll touch upon that a little later. It resolved the issue of the broadband connection sort of going down, and also it removed the risk of the equipment not working when there was a power cut on it was unplugged. And I think the guys from Talk and BT have touched upon the need for those power supplies. Next slide, please, Lee. So the key advantages to our solution is as an organization, we are approved ISO. I've listed them there. We're also work very closely with Alison and her team, and we are TSA QSF approved. The simple and easy to deploy, all we need is a 240 volt supply. There is no need for any cabling at all, not for any of the hubs not for any of the peripherals. So it is totally wireless free. So it's very easy to deploy, and for the residents' perspective, you know, obviously there's less disruption, and because there's no wiring, there is no central point of failure, which means that if one hub does go offline, we have a meshing system where all calls will be picked up by other hubs. We also have on-site location via our smart pendant. So if flat 2 is wandering the scheme and near flat 30, they will press the pendant. It will tell the scheme manager or the call center that exactly where that person is located on the site, which is unique to ourselves. And of course, it's all cloud-based. And you know what we're doing is building a platform that collates health, housing, and social care data. And you know the key there is, you know, it will allow commissioners to take a more holistic approach to personalised care, which is even more important nowadays because, you know, we're not in a one-size-fits-all world. We need to be able to delivering very bespoke solutions. We utilize machine learning and artificial intelligence, and Nick touched upon this, because what we're striving is to deliver a proactive model of care, not a reactive. If you look at that reactive model of care, I started in this industry in the mid-80s, and it hasn't changed. It hasn't changed. You know, what we need to be doing to make a real impact is to get into these people before they have an issue. So the use of artificial intelligence, which is identifying huge visits to the toilet, potential UTI, falls, slumps, staying in bed, etc. You know, can all be used to design appropriate interventions. From a resilience perspective, our hubs have two SIM slots. That's not easy to say. 2 SIM slots from a resilience perspective, and also we have Wi-Fi routers built within each hub. So 2 things, you can use that as backup, but also it allows people to use their own devices. So, you know, from a digital inclusive perspective, we see that has been a real benefit. Everything's live. We have smart data alerts. So, you know, everything is in real time. So if there is an issue, you know immediately. And we also have designed support processes that where we can access the systems remotely, update software, and remote fixes. I mean, of course, that is very beneficial to the residents. We have a My Everon, which is a centralized asset management tool, which allows all of our commissioners to access the call management, diverts call routing and reporting, so that you can see on a daily basis, access the status of your assets. And the big thing from our perspective, we've been working very hard over the last year to make our system compatible with all ARCs. And if we could just move on to the next slide, please, Lee. So we've started testing into several ARCs, and what we're doing is developing a partnership program. So where we have completed testing and proven to the commissioners that the technology works, we will then place them on our website with their contact details, what type of platform they have, and which will allow commissioners who are choosing our equipment to have a choice of monitoring program. And I think that's about it from me. And thank you again. And back to you, Alison.
Thank you, Pete. And just at this point, before we move on to our presentation from Jeremy, just to give some updates on funding. As you know, the Adult Social Care White Paper, putting people at the heart of care, which we've referred to, did have lots of funding pots. But the funding pot relating to housing, which Jeremy may touch in his presentation, is 300 million. It's a lot of money, and it's about retrofit, new models of care. It's coming around about January. So yes, we'll work with you, Pete, to make sure that you have sight of that. So when you communicate your white paper, all of your customers and everybody engaging with Everon will understand what that's for. But the 10-year strategy, it's a strategy for 10 years and only a funding pot for 3 years. So the more we engage with this process and deliver some real outcomes for people, then we will have that case for change to take into the further 7-year funding. So there is opportunities. People are seeing the opportunities of digital, and it's really brilliant to be working with some of our partners and suppliers in TSA membership to realise some of those pots for their customers. So now I'm going to move on to Jeremy, a colleague of mine. We're working together on TAPI, and housing is where the heart is. You know, in the white paper, it said every conversation about care must be a conversation about housing, and how relevant that is. For someone 10 years ago that led sheltered housing, supported housing, extra care and tech, I know that if we get to prevention in communities, housing is where we can make a huge, amazing difference. So over to you, Jeremy.
Alison, thanks ever so for that, and apologies I was running late today. I've been actually on a board meeting which finished at 12:30. Sorry if I missed any of the presentations earlier, but I think I've caught most of them. Can I also extend a warm thanks to Everon for their support of the LIN, but also for the work that they've done to help inform the TAPI work programme. For those of you who don't know, TAPI stands for Technology for an Ageing Population Panel for Innovation. TAPI 2 is from principles to implementation, because that's what I'm going to talk about shortly. But Everon have given evidence and working with a number of partners to make sure that the 10 principles that have been identified are acted upon and built in. And I was really struck by what we were hearing about being much more personalised and person-centred, very much what we want to see delivered and co-produced with residents that Alison referred to within a housing model. The next slide, please. Thanks, Lee. If you're not aware of the Housing LIN, or the Housing Learning Improvement Network for short, we're a sort of a UK-wide ideas lab. We do a lot of knowledge exchange for free to support a better understanding about that integration piece that Pete referred to across housing, health and social care. And what we do is sort of put under the spotlight what are the innovations in the sector to enable better housing solutions and care solutions to be achieved for older and disabled adults across England, Scotland and Wales. And we work closely with government. And for some of you who've known the Housing LIN for many years, you will know that the Housing LIN actually was part of the Department of Health, the very body that's going to implement the white paper that Alison just referred to, and the funding streams we hope will come down in the spring. And we were a knowledge exchange platform to develop a hub of expertise, so that at a local level, whether you worked in commissioning adult social care, hospital discharge, or indeed procuring or developing new extra care and sheltered housing, there was a place of good quality information about which provided the tools and the resources and signposted to the examples of good practice. And the Housing LIN continues to do that now, independent of government, largely crowdfunded by a select number of sponsors and some fee-paying income, so that we can continue that connectivity of what I call the knowledge economy, not just the health and social care economy, but how we can continually improve and learn, hence the name, the Housing LIN. So advert over, let's go on to TAPI. So the next slide is just going to give you a bit of that background to TAPI. Alison talked about, that housing is a critical part, and every decision about care is also a decision about housing. Over the last 10 or 15 years, we've actually had a policy gap in making that connectivity across housing, health and social care. And while we've had various strategies and policy papers at a high level, at a local level, it's very much for local government, for health economies to engage with the supply side, whether that's housing, tech, or increasingly care, to develop more appropriate solutions to sort of both look at what our contemporary housing offers are for older adults, but also as we all age, what is it that we want to make sure that we can accommodate those digital solutions. And that's partly why I was really concerned and why Pete quoted what I said around the analog to digital switchover. This is grounded actually in a forerunner to TAPI called HAPPY, Housing Our Ageing Population Panel for Innovation, a project that Lord Best has championed over the last 10 years to identify from a design perspective in our built environments, what are the key characteristics to enable people to live independently for longer. And both in terms of the location of that of the properties, in terms of the space standards, in terms of the access to green and blue space, but also to increasingly become care ready, so that while they may not be delivering appropriate in-reach services for people who need it now, in future, that care readiness enables that property to be adapted to meet the changing needs of the occupant, whether it's because of disability, infirmity, age, or indeed because of other factors such as household growth. And that programme called HAPPY had these 10 principles, of which principle 4 was care readiness. And within that principle was a little sort of loose wording to say, and technology enabled care and support. But at that time, really, Lord Best and the team didn't really fully understand what this was about. And we put it to him that we needed to think a bit more coherently about this and came up with the idea of, well, let's look at technology for an ageing population, or TAPI. And this took some years to get off the ground, but we were delighted that it did finally get off the ground with the funding from Dunhill Medical Trust. And our next slide, please, will just give us a little bit of background to that. Yeah, so we formed a panel. Yeah, thanks, Lee. We formed a panel, the TAPI panel, invited key leading industry partners who had not a vested interest, but a real considerable interest in this, including Alison at the Tech Services Association, but also government departments, not the Department of Health, but the chief architect for housing in the country from the Department of Levelling Up Homes and Communities. The reason being because actually the care element is important, but also we need to make sure that the homes we live in are decent, affordable, warm, and are built and can accommodate that interoperability that Pete talked about. We also invited the local government association and the Director of Social Services to square that loop. But also, we really wanted to have some really high quality academic input. And many of you will know Professor Roy Sandbach from the University of Newcastle Innovation Centre for Ageing, but also very closely aligned with Alison and the team at the TSA. And he was absolutely inspirational to say, actually, we need to move from concept to reality and deliver this on the ground. So we set up an inquiry funded by the Dunhill Medical Trust and ran 4 hearings, ran 4 sector regional events and a substantial call for info, which produced a fabulous report, which showed that there is an appetite to have a much clearer understanding how technology can support an ageing population, but more importantly, how the ageing population itself needs to embrace what technology is and raise that level of awareness and take it forward. And it was a really sort of a moment of sort of inspiration that sort of Roy sort of said, you know, what are these big insights? And as a result of those big insights, we were able to identify a series of principles, which I'll come on to in a minute. But we're not doing this on our own. We're not doing this as a standalone document. It fits into a number of other both policy research and really thought leadership that's taking place across the sector, whether it's about managing risk, about looking at inward investment, about product development. In particular, the TSA and ADAS white paper on technology-enabled care and support, the forerunner, in effect, to the adult social care white paper last year, and that has been pivotal to embed issues around digitalisation, both in the white paper, but also the work with NHS improvement as well. A piece of work that Dunhill have funded called The Future of Housing and Care, an inquiry and a commission they had chaired by, well, in fact, Paul Burster, again, a chair of TSA, so another good link here to look at what the future of our housing might be and how we can make sure that that's technology enabled. And if you're not aware, there's also an all-party parliamentary group on assistive technology led by Policy Connect. and they've been running a smart homes and independent living commission. And they've been really keen to look at both the asset management and the building control elements so for wheelchair users, for people with a variety of impairments, as well as to think about the telecare. So what we wanted TAPI to do was to address both the housing elements, the care elements, and the health elements, and look at what sort of core domains could be person-centered from the outset and put the person at the center. And the next slide will I think you've already had it this afternoon. The next slide, Lee, sort of demonstrates gives the headlines of those 10 core principles. And the importance of these is, in particular in relation to the digital switchover, it's not just about telecare. It's also thinking about our smart housing solutions, our building management solutions, issues around energy efficiency, thermal comfort, climate change, all the sort of aspects you can build in for the systems that Pete has already been talking about this afternoon. So again, we were really struck by the evidence that we received, and now going to test out at a locality level how we can sort of adopt these 10 principles and put them into practice. The next slide, please. The next one really just gives you an oversight of how we're going to do this, and we're really at an early stage. The inquiry one has a full working report. It's a great overview of what the sector can do and is doing at a very micro level. What we want to do is build on that platform and take this forward, and we're doing it because TSA and ourselves realise we can't do it on ourselves. We need to do it in partnership. We want to do it in partnership with a rigorous academic body, and we brought in the University of Cambridge, the Centre for Housing Planning Research. You may be familiar with the work of Dr. Gemma Burgess, outstanding academic work thinking about the housing and the built environment. We also wanted to listen and experience the lived experience of residents, users of services, and we're working with a small micro company, a little startup called Production Works, who've got a vast amount of history and experience working closely in local communities to really understand and listen to the voice of residents. And we're applying this, our knowledge, our experience and our research into 6 locality test beds in England, Scotland and Wales. And many of you on the call here today will already be linked in, I'm sure, with some of them in one way or another, whether it's Beeld Housing Association in Scotland, who are the largest sheltered housing provider, Pobble Housing Association, who are one of the biggest housing associations for all affordable housing in Wales, predominantly in South Wales, but have some real challenges there in terms of both urban and rural communities, and a mixture of other sort of providers, local authorities and housing associations, and indeed suppliers across Wiltshire, Haringey, Platform Housing Group, for those of you who don't know, it's in the West Midlands predominantly, and Southend Care, who predominantly provide domiciliary care. And the key thing here is about where does that tech enablement link into existing housing management, building management solutions, care and support services, but equally, how does it enable people to self-care, self-manage and build that resilience into the system? And these 6 sites are going to be really great test beds over the next 15 months. And with us and the TSA, we'll be sharing the findings through our web platform, but also through our steering group, which is going to be chaired by Roy Sandbach, who I mentioned is who chaired the first group. I'm also delighted that we got, I don't know if I can say this publicly, Lee, but we've got IKEA on board as well, because they are adopting a European standard of ageing to think about how their products can become much more age inclusive. Again, inclusivity being one of the 10 TAPI principles. I'm conscious I'm rabbiting on and I could speak for England, as many of you can now understand. But the next slide just demonstrates some of the sort of the roles that we're all going to play. So not in addition to actually digging down and working closely with TSA and the delivery partners to actually understand how those 6 sites are going to take forward those TAPI principles, we've got a really comprehensive communications dissemination strategy, both online but also running communities of practice, supporting regional and national events, facilitating regular meetings of the Dunhill Medical Trust and all the partners. So we've got the strategic oversight being provided by the steering board, as I said, IKEA, and a number of other sort of leading people are on that board. We hope to make an announcement in the next 2 or 3 weeks. We're going to be developing a series of tools that we want to road test and involve you in taking those forward to support that delivery. And we want to see that transformation take place over the next 12. In fact, it's probably going to be more like 15 months, but we're really looking forward to taking those forward. So I hope I've whetted your appetites. There's a lot of great stuff to pick up on. And in fact, what's already happening, I've just come off a call with Dunhill. They're funding a number of other projects which are so aligned to this. And I'm sure your own experiences working with partners, and you're both commercially and not-for-profits in the UK, there's a lot of this that you can immediately pick up and run with. So thanks ever so. I think the last slide are just our contact details and how you can find a little bit more about both the LIN, but also more importantly about the TAPI 2 project.
Thank you, Jeremy. And I think what you're demonstrating to the audience, and certainly the participants of service delivery out there across the UK, is this is government agenda. This is on everybody's mind about how we really truly change people's lives enabled by technology. But the purpose of today, and it's rightly so, is making sure that we do have the standards, we're delivering quality, and we're doing a safe transition. As part of TAPI, there will be a standards development led by TSA. So that'll look at standards, and it'd be fabulous to get some of the insights from today, Pete, so that it feeds into the overall standards development that'll go into the framework. That's not only for our sector, our service sector, it's not just for the tech-enabled care suppliers, it is for our retrofit, our RICs, our asset managers, as well as our new build. So you start to see how we can make a big, huge impression and lead some of this agenda with the housing providers across the country. There is going to be a huge workforce piece. As we start to develop in TAPI some of those workforce new models of housing, there will be workforce dynamic tools of how our repairs engineers, how our asset managers learn from what we mean about safe technology enabled care. So it's so relevant that this discussion's taken today and how we feed it in. There is a poll. Please, if you're on the call today, understanding over the landscape and the customers on the call, how ready you are for digital is really important, not only to Everon, but the entire sector, and certainly feeding into some of this national agenda around TAPI and other things. So please, if you haven't already answered those questions, get to them. I had one question, Jeremy, before we go into the debate, is that's brilliant and there's so much cherished stuff there. There was lots of people applied and didn't get one of those 6. How does everybody on the call today engage with the TAPI process, and how can Everon help us support with those customers to make sure their voices are heard and they do get the learning experience?
Well, I think there's different ways, and we very much welcome people being engaged with us. I think Pete and the team have already talked about a white paper that's coming out before the end of this year. There will be references to TAPI and also some of the active engagement that's been taking place with the sector via Everon over the last 6 months, some really interesting roundtables, breakfast meetings and the like. Secondly, I think we had over 50 unsuccessful bids that you referred to, Alison, and we were managing a lot of disappointment. You're absolutely right. We are keen to develop a community of practice with the TSA so that we can both have that knowledge hub I described at the outset, that we'll have a knowledge zone where we can share practice that's being developed and also listen and learn from where others who are actually escalating it in their own economies and their own marketplaces, irrespective of TAPI. So, for example, I heard a fantastic report that actually is coming out next week on the 25th by the University of Stirling, who've been working with Stonewater Housing Association on very low-level technology, little things like grab rails and handheld hand grips, and then looking at that, how that links into things like nutrition and diet and catering and eating and living well, because those are equally important as the care management. So we want to make sure that these principles apply to other projects and other projects that are in pipeline. But the community of practice, the website, and the regular news bulletins, I mentioned communication and dissemination being a core strategy. This is being led by the TSA and my colleague Jerome Billiter. We've got some fantastic case studies, videos, blogs. We've got ideas of a regular bulletin. We completely recognise that we need to make this, but not just the awareness of our sector in terms of our professionals, but also make it very real for my mum, your aunt, etc.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jeremy. And I think that the work of Everon to date and being part of the first inquiry just shows you their commitment to actually making a difference in communities. So thank you for that. Do we have John? I believe John's back on the call now because there's been lots of questions coming through from John from Openreach.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, back. A few
thank you,
problems.
John. We have a couple of questions, and I think the main one is how can Openreach ensure that their engineers protect the lives of vulnerable people when they're going in and they're doing the migration? We have a really key question related to that from Michelle in Cardiff. Michelle, if you're on the call, would you like to just share your experience where maybe this hasn't happened? And then we'll come back from a response from John.
Yeah, no, sorry, can you all hear me fine?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, we're just getting lots of reports from various local authorities in Wales at the moment whereby, you know, the customer's been upgraded, quite rightly so, but then the equipment isn't being checked. And it means then, of course, then our customers are having falls. We're not aware of it. And it's going to create a massive problem for us. And I think not just in Wales, but across the whole of the UK. So really, what can be done to prevent this from happening? Is there like some sort of training for the engineers to be checking that this person is vulnerable before they sign, you know, sort of connect the Lifeline unit back in to make sure that that test call comes through? What sort of education piece is there going to be? Because not all of the customers, you know, as some of you are aware, you know, if they've got a form of, you know, a form of dementia, for example, are not going to know if they need to test that. They're reliant on other people to do it for them. So what can we do to prevent that from happening?
All right, fantastic question, first of all, and I absolutely share your concern. It keeps me awake at night. It has done for the last 2 years. I've been telling people about that, and my role has been to educate people. Unfortunately, I'm only the messenger. I can't tell you how to improve. I can tell you what the state of play is today. So you're in Cardiff, I think you said. There's a really fantastic contact, I'm not sure he's on today, called Geraint Williams, and he is in Swansea, your neighbouring council. He's been doing some fantastic work with his telecare clients. I would definitely suggest you speak to him. I can put you together if you want to. No problem with that. I can introduce you if you can give me the details afterwards. So let me just kind of lay out the kind of the pros and cons of this. Okay, so number one, an engineer will only arrive at the premises usually if it is conversion to fibre to the premises, only if it's FTTP. Okay, now that raises a question straight away. All the customers that are not moving to full fibre, where their master socket is remaining in situ, do not need a visit. That means that we are going to be completely in the hands of their telephone provider, their communication provider, and Phil is on here from Talk, but there are many, many others. It's going to be up to those folks to know if that customer is on their books as vulnerable. Now, there's a very good chance they won't be, because I don't know about you, but if you suddenly were given a telecare device, I'm not sure the top of your agenda will be, oh, I must phone my phone company and tell them that. So there's a very good chance that the telephone company will not know that customer has got a telecare device. If the conversion is not to full fibre, so it's fibre to the cabinet, as I mentioned earlier, there is no need for an engineering visit. If the customer is unknown to their telephone provider as being vulnerable in any way, then all of the work that is done to convert them on the date that is set by their telephone provider is going to be done in the street. So it raises a new thing, which is the first that customer knows they've got a problem is when they try and use the service and it isn't there. And that is a sharper problem than actually what happens when the engineer turns up. So I want to highlight that to you. There is no current solution for that. It's been out there for a long, long time, and there's been lots of people thinking about it, but there is currently no solution. Now, what Swansea have done, interesting enough, is Swansea actually contacted about a year ago now, I think it was, their telecare client base They sent a really good letter, which I've actually used as a case study to other councils. I've also provided comms to other councils to say to these are the kind of things you should be saying to people, and they can support you with all of that. But what it basically they said was, if you are a telecare user, that's why I'm writing to you as the council, please contact your telephone company and tell them, register them, that you actually have got that issue, so that they're aware of that. So that's what they were doing. The letters also said things like, get your neighbours involved, get your friends involved, get your relatives involved, get them to help you with this. Now, not foolproof by any count, but that's something positive that can be done. And it starts, unfortunately, with the adult social care department. They're the ones who know where their customers are. Most telephone companies will not know where those customers are, and we at Openreach haven't got a clue where they are. We don't keep any kind of register for vulnerable people because they're not our customers. Our customers are people like Phil from Talk, Vodafone, so on. So that is between the communications provider and the end customer. Let's move on to your question about fibre to the premises. If an engineer has to turn up because the communications provider is moving their customer to full fibre, they need to have one of these boxes I mentioned earlier. Okay. Currently, the engineer's training is, if you see a customer with a telecare device, you should say to them, is someone coming around after I leave to get that plugged back in? Because it's a third-party bit of kit, I can't touch it. If that customer says, it's fine, it's great, I've got somebody from the council coming, they will go ahead. I suspect that will happen very often. It's more likely the customer, for the reasons that you said, Michelle, will go, I don't know what you're talking about, shall I put the kettle on? And therefore, the engineer should abort at that point and go back to the communications provider and say, I didn't go ahead with that because I was worried that I'd be walking out having cut that person's extension sockets off and so on, and the telecare device didn't work. And it is then for the communications provider to contact their customer and liaise to try and work that out. That's where we are. There's also been a bit of work going on now since at least January, to my knowledge, between the OTA, who are a subgroup of Ofcom, and Openreach, and I think a lot of people on this call, to see if there's anything better that can be done. Is there a way that Openreach could do more when they're doing the conversion? And that is still ongoing. The problem they still have is this: who takes liability? Openreach's current position and position for many, many years has been, we stop at the socket. We stop at the socket, we don't go any further. We don't provide kit, we don't provide routers, we won't touch third-party equipment. Therefore, we shouldn't touch any of your equipment, but we should, if we noticed, abort if we think there's a risk to life. That's where we are. All this other stuff, which is, well, could we do this, and can we plug it in, and can we make a call to the company? It's all being thought about, and it's all being worked on. I'm not on that project. A guy called Chris Murdoch, one of my colleagues, is on that. Peter Wright from the OTA is on that, and I think there's some people on this call that are probably on that work. But at the moment, my understanding is, sitting here in October, it's been about 10 months worth of work, and still nobody has cracked the, what do you do? Do you take responsibility? If the person dies after you walk out, what do you do? And that's the issue. Now, Virgin, I'm not going to talk for because they're our competitor, but I know they've got a completely different stand to this, and their view is a bit different. They actually do try and help, and they leave the customer in a particular position, and they give them a bit of documentation. And that may be the way that we go, but currently that isn't it. So in summary, fibre to the premises, engineering visit, engineers should abort, and they should refer it back to the communications provider. That's how it should be done. If that isn't happening, if you have examples of that, send them to me and I will get them investigated. Or if it is particular communications providers, again, send it to me and I will contact my contacts, people like Phil, for example, in Talk, and there are a number of others who I've counterpart, and I can actually say to them, can you look into this? What went wrong? Because that wasn't how it should have happened. Sorry, it's quite a long answer, but hopefully there's helped.
No, thank you, John. We've been doing similar letters to Swansea. We've also been putting labels on the devices to say, you know, if something's happening to the phone line and you're changing things over, please consider this is a telecare unit. Make sure it works. We've got it.
They were doing that, yeah.
So we're doing that as well. I think we're part of a sort of a LIN group as well within Wales. So we've all been communicating with one another. So as much as we're trying to as well to combat that, there's obviously some people where family are not nearby. Those people are on their own, and there are going to be quite a few people who are going to slip through the cracks. Is what my concern is. But
definitely, and you're right to be so. It keeps me awake at night. It worries the life out of me, and it doesn't matter if I'm presenting to banks or the NHS or to lift companies. Someone always says, yeah, but I want to talk about my granny. It always happens. It always comes back to telecare without fail, and it should do, rightly. It's critical life infrastructure, but actually, because of all of these demarcation lines, it is a mess. And I personally think And the work I've been doing with Wiltshire County Council, I've reached out through the LGA. Wales actually been fantastic. I've actually managed to speak to all 22 Welsh councils over the last couple of years. It's been more difficult to get through COSLA and Scotland, and I have got, I think, through about 75, 80 English councils out of 358, but there's only me and I'm doing it on my own. And I keep reaching out to the LGA, I reached out to TCMS, trying to do more and more to make sure that local authorities are aware this is an issue for them, and to try and get them, whether they like it or not, they are the ones that know the customers. They know where they are, they know their phone numbers, and they can warn them. And as much as you can say, well, you're creating a problem for us, which is true, the truth of it is that the phone company doesn't know, we don't know. And that's why what you're doing in the local authority, and you're trusted as well, you won't come over as just being a scammer, because there are other worried people scamming people. So local authorities, unfortunately, you've got a massive part to play, and it is costly. I understand that. I know, for example, in Swansea, they were given some money, about 14 months to look after 3 people's salary to do that. It's unfortunate, but it's life-saving. So anything the local authority can do, it's not kicking it over the wall. It is just a fact. The local authorities are trusted, and people do read letters from local authorities. My concern as well, Michelle, is that a lot of letters from communications providers saying, hey, Mrs. Jones, great news, we're going digital on such and such a day, will be not understood, thrown in the bin as marketing bump. There'll be routers turning up and people say, I didn't order a box or anything, take it away. All of that stuff's got to be thought about.
Okay, I'm conscious of the time and we've got lots of debate. We have to, this is the real, the here, the now. This is about mitigating risk. Tim talked about there's letters going out for testing. The round table with the Minister, with the Secretary of State, had 2 areas to it. It was testing, but the other area was consistent messages through Ofcom and through our comms providers. There will be a further round table. TSA will take that forward. All of this cherished stuff here about the real world life examples, helping, being stronger together with our colleagues in comms, with consistency of messaging is critical. So raising it again today, brilliant from everybody, but I would like to now take a bit of half an hour of the time, because the good thing about analog to digital is we have to mitigate the risk, but we need to start seeing the opportunity, or all of that wonderful thing that we're describing in TAPI that we've heard from some of the examples from Nick and from Pete. We'll never get there if we can't trust what we're doing. So I want to give some confidence on the call and just some general questions about how do we move into that opportunity space, about where digital is going to take us to deliver better outcomes for people and better lives. So my first question is going to go back to Nick, is and it's about the SIMs. So we're moving from analog and then we're going into SIMs. We're seeing roaming SIMs outage. There's a question come through. Telecare industry over the last 12 months, how does your solution mitigate against those outage? So we'll go into that one, then we'll move on to some questions for Pete, and there is many. Over to you, Nick.
Yeah, okay. So as I said previously, the Everon solution uses S-size solution, which is based on SIMs. Pete talked about the fact that there's 2 SIMs in each device. It also has an Ethernet port, and it's the Ethernet port that can go through the digital or the current system, the copper system, as it stands. So the real question is, how do you get 100% connectivity for every device in every location all the time? And the problem, and that's the problem essentially we solve as a company, because the problem is that, let's say you've got a Vodafone SIM, then there will be gaps. You get a very high percentage by head of population, but you don't get a very high percentage by square meter, because the towers just aren't where in the rural areas, for example. So what we do, just at the very highest level, is we're like a big aggregator of all the world's mobile networks. So we can connect through a single SIM to over 700 networks. And so essentially what we sell is 100% connectivity through a SIM, where you don't actually worry about who you're connected to. We actually have a switch in the cloud. It's a virtualized switch in the cloud, and we just switch to whatever operator is available at that time. It's invisible to our customers. So that's why Everon use our solution, because they need 100% connectivity. You can't rely on the power going out in the home. You can't rely on the cables. You can't rely on somebody not switching things on or not reading a label, as I've heard on this webinar. Essentially, you just switch it on, and you don't worry about it, you don't think about it. It's just connected all the time, and you use your Ethernet cable as a backup, but frankly, because you can connect to 700 networks, you're not going to get all 700 of the world's mobile networks going down at the same time. So essentially, that's what we do. The model's called an MVNO, Mobile Virtual Network Operator, and we just aggregate everything together, do the central billing, and you have one SIM, and it'll connect to, if there's any signal whatsoever available where the device is or needs to be, the hub is, it will connect to it, and you don't have to even think about it. It's just, you just look at the data. You don't think about the technology, because that's not the business that you're in.
Fantastic. Well, I think that'll give lots of people on the call some confidence. Just to follow up on that, is there any time limits on those calls, the connectivity of the calls?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
No, I mean, just like there isn't on your phone. I mean, the way our customers are companies like Everon, so I speak to them, but basically they are buying connectivity from us, and we buy it from the Vodafones and the Threes and the Oranges and whoever, and we do it globally. We just charge them, and it's pretty low data. I mean, when you're measuring, has someone switched a kettle on or not, or made a phone call, it's not high volumes of data. I mean, you can do video, obviously, like in Costa Coffee machines are doing all the video, the advertising, but in this case, it's not typically video. So no, there's no limit, and there's no capacity limit. There's no time limit. It's just like a service. I mean, the true value of technology is when it becomes invisible and you don't think about it.
Yeah.
Because like I say, you want to run assisted living, properties. You want to look after patients. You don't want to build an IT department. So we just basically make all that invisible for you, and Everon package it up into a solution that, as Pete said, you just switch it on, and that's all you have to do.
Well, Nick, as a housing provider for many, many years, it's music to my ears that you're saying you're just delivering simple solutions. And I think now over to Pete. We'll have a question in about SIM-based scheme solutions over hardwired. My days back in Newcastle of delivering hardwired services and what I wanted them to do. Tell me, what's the difference, and why? What are the benefits for the people on the call if they were going to go down that road?
Sure. So I think the big thing is connectivity, as Nick has quite rightly explained. I think the ease of installation means that all you need is a 240 volt supply, so there's no cables. And I know that I've had discussions with housing providers that are frightened of the cable networks now because of, I think, following on from the Grenfell situation where cables have been run and breached, fire compartmentalization. There is just not that risk. And the big thing is the residents' experience. It's the way that we operate is that we deliver the hardware into each dwelling, we make sure that it's working, and then we switch off the whole system, which means it's a seamless switchover. So, and of course you haven't, installation times for a 30-way site is probably less than 4 days. So they're the big benefits to us.
Brilliant. I think there's lots of questions, and I think you're going to have to go through some of the questions coming through after the session and coordinate them into a response. But still, with you, Pete, how interoperable is the Everon solution with the typical analog scheme equipment? So your smokes, your lifts. It used to be my pet hate that I had a contract over here for smoke. I had a contract over here for lift, and how interoperable, because 10 years down the line, I'm hoping that it is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, in the current installations, we are integrating our technology into analog fire systems, where, there are upgrade programs that we're working with, but we can integrate into analog fire systems, lifts, and smoke detectors. We can install our radio smokes to make them compatible. So we're happy to work with commissioners looking at what's installed And ideally, you know, what we do come across is smoke detectors that do need replacing because they're fairly old, but we have integrated existing smoke detectors into the system as well. And by using one of our radio tokens, it means that we can see whether it's online or offline because the system pings every 30 seconds. So as I mentioned quickly in my presentation earlier, you know, everything is real live data. So if a smoke detector went offline, it would report that immediately. So yeah, we can, answering your question, we can interact with a lot of analog solutions.
Brilliant. I'm sure everybody on the call would like to know, how do we purchase, how do we commission, how do we get access? So do you want to share with the audience what procurement frameworks you're actually involved with, and which ones are you working with, just to give an idea of how they could access your services?
Yeah, no, certainly. So we've partnered on the Northern Housing Consortium with Carian, who's a monitoring station. So they've given us route to that, and we do use them for monitoring as well. We are on ESPO, and we're working. Our sales director Lee is working to get us on other procurement sites as well. But you know, as that changes, we'll make that news available through our website.
Okay. There's still more questions, but there's still a few minutes left if anybody has any burning questions. One of the questions that's come through, and
you may want to know, Alison, that Liz Truss is due to resign.
I've just got that through, and I think that's what we won't clap, but I think we should. What difference will that make to us? It's been so much, you know, when you're lobbying government, we don't know which government we're lobbying. We don't know which minister we're lobbying for you on behalf of you. So there's some interesting rocky roads in front of us, but we just need to keep static, and we need to really think about how we work together, be stronger together. When the minister comes in or the government changes, what are we saying and why are we saying it? Our message has never changed. I'm just hoping that some of those money pots don't disintegrate. One of the key things that has come through today is about those vulnerable lists, those customers, and we heard from John that the easiest way is for us to navigate some of that data. And Tim Mulray is still on the call. It will be good to understand how we can work with Everon, other suppliers, people on the call, to make sure that you do have all of your comms providers are aware of your vulnerable people that you're serving, because I think this is really important. We might know when it's coming in, when the migration's happening, but if the people, and we don't know everybody, there's a gap there. I don't know how easy it is. Tim Mulray will be going mad with me, but that is a big question here from today, and how can we help and support? There's some major things coming through, like, you know, we've got the crisis on fuel. Vulnerable people disconnecting because they think it's using all this whatever. We're doing as much as we can from our side, but if you can work with Everon and we get some of this feedback, what you need for safe installations, put more communications out together. But for me, it's about everybody putting the same consistent messages, and I think what we're seeing is variants of the same truth. This is why you're hosting the myth busting, because there's so many different variations of the truth. So my call to action from some of today is, let's coordinate and continue those conversations together, lobby like mad, and get some national messages down in campaigning.
So can I just interject? Sorry, can I just interject? I think it's also important from suppliers like ourselves to make sure that our representatives in the field are appropriately trained around safeguarding, and that they are, you know, have the ability to identify where there's a risk to an individual. So I think that's key as well.
I think, Peter, you know, you putting your name to a quality standards framework was a conversation for suppliers to make sure that you are putting people at the heart of everything you do. You've had to demonstrate your safeguarding, your ethics of how you work as a reputable company and put that person at the heart and centre of your service delivery. So you'll see the people on the call today, there's many suppliers have the QSF brand. There's many suppliers being committed to that, of which Everon has been committed for quite some time. So that's an indicator that they're absolutely delivering quality services and putting people at the heart and making sure there's a safe delivery of service. So thank you, and keep up that great work, Pete. And you'll be measured annually that you're definitely doing that. So is there any other questions coming through from the audience? Anybody want to put the hand up? Or have we delivered? We've got probably another 10 minutes. Everybody goes quiet. I think we've given them a lot of information today, Pete, which is fantastic, but I'm not letting you all off with it. The speakers on the call today, what I think we would like to conclude is if there's one key message that you would like to leave with the audience, one key thing that you would like them to take away to their busy schedule and trying to get through and all of this information that they've got and what can be trusted and what you want to leave them with, what would it be? Over to you, John.
So for me, it would be to do an audit. Whether you run an estate of products, whether this is your own personal line, whether it is a business that you're involved in, think about what is plugged into the socket today and ask yourself the question, if there's going to be a router there for the first time, how am I going to connect to that router? How do I keep it alive in a power cut? And is it going to work reliably for me?
Thank you, John. Over to Nick. I can see Nick on my screen.
Yep, I'm here. You know, I would say actually start off with the experience that you want to deliver, which I'm sure you all know, and then ask yourself the question: how could getting more proactive data, continuous data in a cloud platform and enhance that experience, and then work that way in? Don't work from don't start off with thinking, what have I got to do for this program, but think, what would I like to do? Pick one area where you'd like to enhance a business process, the provision of care, housing, health or whatever. Ask yourself, how could that process be completely transformed by data? And then to ask, well, is that possible? Because as I said previously, every single thing in the world, including everything in a house, everything is going to be transmitting data. It already is. I think as a sector, you're clearly not taking as much advantage of it as some of the commercial sectors, or in your own home, probably got a lot of technology that is doing this already. So start off with one area and trying to optimize one process, and actually then you suddenly find that you're doing it, and then things get a lot easier.
Thank you. Next one over to Phil.
Hi there. I think really the main thing I'd say is it's really important. I mean, just don't. I'm trying to word this correctly. Don't do nothing. You've got to do something about this. You've got to have a plan. So it's not going to work for you if you just go to the next one of these sessions or go to the next one, because that time frame for doing this is getting smaller and smaller. And as we mentioned earlier, we started this 4 years ago. And it seemed a long time away. We're now just over 3 years away from this happening. So I would suggest, similar to John really about the audit, is just have a plan of what you're going to do. The worst thing you can do is do nothing.
Thank you, Phil. And over to yourself, Pete, if there's something you would like to leave with the delegates on the call today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we shouldn't be frightened of deploying GSM-based solutions. They work well. They're proven, especially in Europe. And I think we need to be working together to push the boundaries. The change from this 40-year-old reactive model to the proactive model is the future. We have that objective, and we want to work with commissioners who are like-minded, that want to adopt a new model and, as I say, push those boundaries.
Thank you. And finally, Jeremy.
You know what, I want to sort of pick up on what I think Angus has put in the chat. You know, we need to move from talking to do the walking. And as Phil says, we don't have a lot of time. We have 23 million homes in the UK, of which about just under 1 million are housing people who are really vulnerable and sheltered and special needs, specialist housing. We know that very few of those are really getting to it yet. So, you know, let's give them the talk, but actually let's help them do the walking.
Thank you, Jeremy. And from TSA, I think what I would like us to continue to do is work together, be stronger together, keep that communication, that collaboration. We were absolutely superb within COVID, and that demonstrated us to have a real profile and influence in government through local authorities, through health boards. You're going to hear some really valuable stuff coming out, how the NHS are working directly with TSA and our responder services with it's imminent within the next few days. But I think for everybody on the call who wants to commission safely, there is some commissioner's guidance through the TSA that we can circulate with the papers, but you can go onto the website and see it. And finally, there's loads of questions, isn't there? You need to come to a trusted source. So the TSA has a live help desk with any outage or any problem, and we will then communicate through the members directly to your supplier and see how we can support. Tim Murray leads that, but he has a team of individuals that will support as well. You're not alone. This is a safe place if you choose and you commission wisely. If you work with the right partners, if you seek the right information, there is a bright future about us delivering people at the heart of care and really delivering proactive preventative services in communities. So I would just like to encourage everybody, if you're sitting on the fence or you want more support, come to the TSA. We'll work with our partners to introduce and just take that plunge of making a real difference. So I think this has been a great debate. I'm looking forward to seeing the poll and the results and the questions from that, Pete. But I'm also looking to see some of the answers to some of the questions and your imminent white paper. So thank you very much on behalf of Housing LIN, TSA, but most importantly, Everon, for facilitating, bringing everybody together and actually making this a reality of an open discussion. The webinar, the recording, will all go onto Everon's website as soon as possible, and I'm not going to put a time limit on, but very quickly, because this has been a lively debate. And not forgetting December, we'll work with Everon around their white paper and make sure that they have all the information about future funding, not just in England, but where's the funding across the whole of the UK that can make a real difference to each and every one of you who are taking this transition. So thank you from myself and the Everon team. Is there anything you would like to add at the end, Pete, just as we close the webinar?
I was literally just typing a message just to say a big thank you to the speakers and to everybody who's attended. And if anybody wants any more advice, then please do contact me. And my details are on the screen as we speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day and catch up with everybody soon.